Johnny Carson had the smoothest smile on television. For 3 decades he ruled late-night TV, charming, witty, and cool under pressure. But even Carson had a breaking point. Most nights he made it look easy. Laughs flowed. Guests played along. The studio audience was his kingdom, and he was the king. But behind the scenes, a different story brewed. There were moments where even Johnny, the consummate host, struggled to hide his disdain. This isn't about flubbed lines or awkward silences. These were personal, deep. Guests who crossed unspoken lines, broke the chemistry, betrayed his trust, or simply refused to play by the rules of his stage, and he never forgot it. In this video, we're revealing the 5 guests Johnny Carson hated the most. Not disliked, hated. Some of these names may shock you. Icons, legends, people the world adored, but whom Carson quietly, deeply resented. We'll explore betrayals that shattered friendships, confrontations that got physical, and moments that made Carson question whether the show was even worth it. Every host deals with difficult guests, but for Johnny Carson, the stakes were higher. He wasn't just interviewing celebrities. He was orchestrating a nightly ritual watched by millions. Everything had to run like clockwork. So when someone tried to hijack the rhythm, or worse, make the show about them, Carson took it personally. And here's the thing, he rarely let it show, which makes the few times he did all the more revealing. From emotional fallout to straight-up feuds, these stories paint a very different picture of the late-night legend. A man who, while always professional, had limits he'd never admit. To On Air, let's start with a name that changed Carson's world, and not in a good way. Joan Rivers was more than just a guest. She was Johnny Carson's protege, his favorite fill-in host, a fixture on The Tonight Show. For years, Carson brought her back again and again. She was fast, funny, bold, and she got the show's rhythm. He trusted her. Some even said she was being groomed as his successor. But in 1986, that trust shattered. Fox was launching a new late-night show. Joan Rivers was offered the host role, a groundbreaking move that would make her the first woman to head a network late-night talk show. A huge opportunity, but she didn't tell Carson. Not before the news broke, not before it was public. Carson didn't just feel blindsided, he felt betrayed. He had helped build her career, given her the biggest platform in television, and in return, she walked quietly and never gave him a chance to hear it from her directly. Rivers tried to call him multiple times. He never picked up, never returned a call, and he never spoke to her again, ever. Carson banned her from The Tonight Show, not just while he was host, even after he retired. Jay Leno, Carson's successor, upheld the ban for years out of respect. It wasn't about competition, it was about loyalty. To Carson, the stage was sacred. You didn't just walk off it without looking him in the eye. Joan Rivers became a star in her own right. But to Johnny Carson, she was the one who turned her back. And for that, she made the list. If Joan Rivers broke Carson's heart, Wayne Newton tested his nerves. Carson loved a joke. That's what he did. But some of those jokes hit a nerve, especially with Newton. The Tonight Show host often poked fun at Newton's flamboyant image, his Vegas stage glitz, his high-pitched voice, his appearance. The jokes were subtle. At first, then they weren't. Went from playful to personal, and Newton noticed. One day, Newton walked into Carson's office, uninvited, angry, confrontational, no cameras, no audience, just the two of them. What happened next wasn't televised, but according to reports, Newton physically intimidated Carson, got in his face, made it clear the jokes stop or things would get ugly. Carson, normally in full control, was visibly shaken. He wasn't used to being threatened, especially not by a guest. He backed off. The jokes stopped, but the tension remained. From that point on, Carson kept his distance. Newton would still appear, rarely, But the spark was gone. The air was heavy, every moment laced with unresolved tension. For a man who built his career on controlling the room, Carson never forgot how Newton made him feel powerless, even just for a moment, and that made Newton unforgettable. In the worst way. Frank Sinatra was television royalty, an icon, and Carson respected him. But he didn't enjoy him. Sinatra had a reputation, larger than life, surrounded by yes-men, and used to calling the shots. That worked in Vegas, not on Carson's stage. On one infamous night, Carson was delivering his monologue, his moment. Then, out of nowhere, Sinatra walked on stage, interrupting the show. The crowd laughed. Carson smiled, but behind that smile was fury. Sinatra had stolen his moment, live, on camera. No warning, Carson handled it with grace. He always did. But off camera, the resentment brewed. It wasn't just that moment. It was the entourage, the diva-like behavior, the demands. Sinatra didn't just come to be interviewed. He came to command the room, and Carson hated that. He built The Tonight Show on structure, on timing, and Sinatra didn't care. He showed up when he wanted, took the spotlight, and made it clear. He wasn't just a guest. He was a show unto himself. The audience may have adored Sinatra, but behind the scenes, Carson dreaded those appearances, because every time Sinatra walked onto the set, Johnny knew he wasn't the star anymore. Shelley Winters was a powerhouse, an Academy Award-winning actress with a legendary presence and a voice that filled the room before she even sat down. She was bold, brash, and utterly unapologetic, and she absolutely drove Johnny Carson crazy. It wasn't because she wasn't talented or smart or even funny. It was because Shelley Winters had no off switch. When she came onto The Tonight Show, she didn't just sit for an interview. She took over. From the second she walked on stage, the energy shifted. She interrupted, redirected, and steamrolled the conversation. Carson liked control. He needed it. That's what made him great. The smooth transitions, the well-timed laughs, the ability to guide a conversation like a conductor. But Winters? She didn't follow cues. She rewrote them. She would leap from one topic to another, rambling into Hollywood anecdotes, political tangents, or personal philosophies, often without warning. And worst of all, she rarely let Carson get a word in. It wasn't just chaotic. It was exhausting. One night, mid-interview, Winters removed her shoe and handed it to Carson. No explanation, just passed it across the desk like it was a completely normal thing to do. Carson was visibly thrown. He tried to make a joke, but the rhythm was off. The crowd laughed, awkwardly. Moments like that happened every time she was on, and the audience loved it because Shelley Winters brought drama. She brought stories. She brought unpredictability. But she also disrupted everything Carson worked to build, that careful balance between structure and spontaneity. It wasn't just that she was loud or wild. It was that she didn't care about his show. She cared about her moment. She interrupted his questions. She challenged his premises. She called out jokes she didn't like and doubled down on ones that made Carson visibly uncomfortable. Off camera, it wasn't much better. Winters was known to be demanding, opinionated, and fiercely independent. She didn't defer to anyone, not even the king of late night. And Carson? He was cordial, professional. But the look in his eyes when she veered off topic said it all. He wasn't amused. He was managing a storm, trying to keep the show on the tracks while his guest happily tore up the rails. Over time, Shelley Winters became one of the few guests who visibly tested Carson's patience on air. He smiled, he nodded, but his eyes said, "How much longer is this segment?" They say great interviews are like dance partners. One leads, one follows. With Winters, there was no lead, no follow, just Shelley. And Carson? He hated that dance. If there was one guest who could make Johnny Carson genuinely laugh and simultaneously test his patience, it was Don Rickles. The two had chemistry, real chemistry. Audiences could feel it. Rickles would walk on set, and the room would light up. He didn't need an introduction. He didn't even need a question. All he needed was a face to insult, and the show practically wrote itself. But behind that comedy gold was a much more complicated dynamic, one that Carson didn't always enjoy. Rickles didn't just break the rules. He ignored them. Every time he appeared on The Tonight Show, he brought beautiful chaos. He would talk over Carson, interrupt him, stand up mid-interview, wander around the set, poke at audience members, or shout jokes at the crew. He'd roast anyone in sight, celebrities, producers, the band. And of course, Carson. He would riff on Johnny's hair, his divorces, his icy demeanor, even his insecurities, all live, without warning. For most guests, that would have been career suicide. But Rickles made it art. And Carson, for the most part, laughed it off. Because how could he not? Rickles was electric, but inside, Carson was a control freak. That was his strength. Smooth, seamless, unshakable hosting. Rickles came in like a storm and blew all of that to pieces. And Johnny wasn't always thrilled about it. Rickles didn't play ball. He hijacked the game. One night, Rickles was guest hosting the show. Something. He rarely did, and when he did, chaos was guaranteed. Carson returned the next day to find his beloved desk cigarette box, a sentimental item he kept for years, completely shattered. Rickles had broken it during a sketch. Carson was furious, not in the usual deadpan way, truly furious, and he made it known, on camera. He marched onto the set of C.P. O'Sharkey, Rickles' sitcom, in the middle of a live taping, cameras rolling. With the audience in stitches, Carson confronted him in real time. "Did you break my cigarette box?" he asked, dead serious, beneath a forced grin. Rickles tried to charm his way out of it, as always. But Carson wasn't playing this time. The audience roared, but those who knew Johnny well could see it. That wasn't all an act. It was Carson reclaiming control, his show, his props, his rules. It was hilarious. It was iconic. But it was also a crack in the facade. Because Rickles lived to push buttons. He thrived on discomfort. His own, the audience's, the host's. And Carson? He could only tolerate so much. There were interviews where Carson barely got a word in, segments that derailed so fast you could see the anxiety behind his eyes. At times, Carson would sit back and let Rickles run the show. Other times, you could almost feel him counting the seconds until the commercial break. Still, he kept bringing Rickles back because there was something magnetic about him. No one else could bring that energy, the spontaneity, the tension, the danger. You didn't know what Rickles would say next. And neither did Carson. But that unpredictability came at a cost. Carson valued balance. He respected boundaries. He liked guests who knew how to banter, but also when to pause. Rickles didn't pause. He pounced. He didn't care about the rhythm of the show. He was there to detonate. One particularly edgy appearance involved Rickles, lobbing jokes so sharp about Carson's personal life that viewers actually winced. A few cut too close, referencing Carson's estranged relationships, his struggles with intimacy, even rumors about his temperament backstage. Rickles said it with a smile, but Carson's expression barely budged. That episode became legendary, not just for the laughs, but for the tension. It was the kind of moment that left producers stunned and Carson seething. Yet, here's the twist. Carson respected Rickles more than most, because even when he crossed the line, he did it with genius. And Carson knew talent when he saw it. He also knew television. And Rickles was television. The audience adored the tension between them, the biting back and forth, the awkward silences followed by explosive laughter. Rickles didn't just appear on The Tonight Show. He left dents in it. Off camera, the relationship was equally complicated. Carson was known to be quiet, even withdrawn. Rickles was loud, not just on set, but everywhere. He was the kind of guy who owned the room at dinner parties, who'd roast you to your face, then hug you 5 minutes later. Carson didn't always know how to handle that energy. He admired it, but it wore him out. And yet, Carson never truly shut Rickles out, because deep down he knew Rickles represented something essential: the wild card, the rogue, the guest who broke every rule and still left audiences howling. Their relationship was a paradox: friction and fondness, laughter and limits. Rickles was the only person who could roast Carson mercilessly and still get invited back, because Carson couldn't control him. And strangely, maybe that's what he loved most about Rickles. He was chaos. He was brilliance. He was Carson's ultimate frenemy, and whether Johnny liked it or not, he was unforgettable.